Greetings, everybody. This is Professor Hussein again here at AVM, ASC 2320 Aviation Law and Regulation class. Just a brief overview of governmental liabilities when it comes to aviation leasing, aircraft leasing, whether be it dry leasing or wet leasing. And the most important thing is the regulatory issues, uh, which uh, which covers these rules, these leases. Uh, as we all know, due to technology and smaller world, meaning countries getting together, as far as the distance getting shorter, as far as aviation goes, a lot more foreign international companies getting into leasing businesses. And we all know Ireland is a prime example in Europe, which does all it does is wet leases as well as dry leases for aircrafts. Now we all know different countries have different regulations, but we all have to follow. All nations have to follow ICAO's regulations. But from time to time, there's issues which crop up. For example, just now, recent events in Ukraine and the confrontation between Europe, US, and Russia has brought into new issues, meaning there's almost, I believe, 400 to 500 aircrafts which are leased, and they're in Russia. And now the problem they're facing is obviously they're not paying any payments for those leases because they're stuck there. The airspace is closed, so they can't fly to Europe. Europeans can't go there to collect the aircraft because the Russian airspace is closed to the European aviation. So you can see the issues which come up from time to time. Federal Law Claims Acts, remarkably not did the piece of legal baggage known as doctrine of sovereign immunity has slipped into common laws of U.S. through the early wholesale adoption. But with respect to federal government, it remained the law until World War II when Congress passed the Federal Tort Claims Act, which is FITCA, in 1946. Only 170 years after the Declaration of Independence, Americans were finally permitted to sue the federal government. FITCA allows suit for injury or loss of property, personal injury, or death caused by negligence or wrongful act or omission of any employee or government acting within the scope of his office or employment under circumstances where U.S. if a private person were liable to claimant in accordance with the laws of place where act or omissions occurred. Liability generally under FITCA, the federal government, like employees in the private sector, faces vicarious liability for consequences of negligence committed by its employees acting within the scope of their employment. With few exceptions to be discussed momentarily, federal government is liable for consequences of number one, negligence, as previously analyzed in Chapter 4 of government employees who are acting within the scope of employment with the federal government. And number three, private employer would be liable for employees' tort under the same circumstances. Exceptions, there are several exceptions that distinguish governmental liability from faced by employees in the private sector. Geographic limitations. FITCA specifically excludes claims arising in a foreign country. This is limitation has served to prevent the federal government from being sued. For example, for an accident that occurred at U.S. Air Force Base in Newfoundland that the United States operated on a long-term lease from Great Britain. Since the lease did not transfer sovereignty over areas from Great Britain, issues of liability injuries arising out of U.S. military activities in host nations are addressed in as nation by nation basis through separate status of force agreement between the nations. Combatant activity, if it does not apply to any claims arising out of combatant activity of military or naval forces or Coast Guard during the time of war. Under this exception, suit against the U.S. brought by survivors or passengers and crews of an Iranian airliner shot down by guided missile launched from a U.S. Navy cruiser, which misidentified the plane as threatening military aircraft during 1988 tanker war in the Persian Gulf, was dismissed by the court, which held that because of exceptions, such claims remain barred by the doctrine of sovereign immunity. Liability for negligent air traffic control. In early FITCA cases, claims ATC negligence, government attorneys argue the government shall not be liable because of an air traffic workers in on continuous discretionary functions. Controller must continuously use judgment to issue heading, vectors, altitudes, speed restriction, clearances, limitation to individual aircraft, often having radically different performance capabilities to avoid collisions, to make entire mix of aircraft being handled by that controller and receiving controllers downstream flow as smoothly as possible. Liability, weather-related accidents, air traffic control facilities, federal government employees monitor the weather, advise pilots and dispatchers of current and forecast weather, often suggest alternate routing around severe weather. Weather aircraft where the government has undertaken to provide such services, its employees must do so in reasonably careful manner. FAA flight service stations (FSS) are now staffed by private sector employees of contract with Lockheed Martin, not covered by FITCA. When federal employees significantly understated whether a long pilot's route, federal government has been held liable, for example, including failing to report forecast icing conditions or understating their severity, reporting an incorrect altimeter setting, failing to report deteriorating runway visibility or braking action, or understanding severity of storms, or by reporting known squall line as line of cells. FARs establish minimum visibility requirements for takeoff in commercial operation. No such takeoff minima are prescribed, however, the aircraft operating non-commercially under general operating and flight rules of CFR Part 91. Although it's legal for controllers to issue clearances for pilots operating non-commercially to attempt to take off when visibility is below commercial minima, a takeoff attempt may be imprudent. Despite pervasiveness of FARs, flying still requires pilots continuously to exercise their own judgment. Not every inadvisable action is specifically prohibited by FARs. Although hindsight in an act not specifically prohibited of FAR may be deemed to have constituted careless or even reckless operation in violation of for CFR 91.13. Liability for negligent airworthiness certificate. Each aircraft manufactured in the U.S. is the product of these three separate FAA inspection and certification processes. First, design must be proved to conform to aircraft certification standards contained in FARs. At that point, FAA will issue a type certificate approving the designs. Second, the manufacturer must certify FAA that its production and inspection methodology assures precise replication of design for which aircraft type was issued, each aircraft manufactured to acceptable standards of quality. Personal liability of federal employees. Unlike employees of private enterprise, individuals, federal employees enjoy protection for personal liability for consequences of their own job, on the job negligence. Federal law now provides that whenever a federal employee is sued personally for negligence in performance of federal job, U.S. Attorney will substitute the U.S. for the named employee as defendant and defend the case in his own name. This is it for chapter 9. I shall continue with chapter 10 momentarily. And if, as always, if you have questions, concerns, call me, email me, or text me. Thank you and have a great day.